Adina and I are history educators. We love what we do. Between the two of us, we have over 30 years of experience teaching history. We send each other podcasts and articles about history all the time. It even made us good friends. We look upon it as really a calling for us to make the past relevant and meaningful to our students.
And we're both passionate Zionists as well. Israel plays a central part in both of our lives. I spent some of my most formative years living in and studying in Israel, walking streets named after some of my ancestors. Like the current president, I'm a descendant of the Rivlin family, and my ancestors came from Lithuania in the early 19th century, and my grandfather was born in pre-state Palestine, and stories about them really form an important part of my connection to the land.
My third child was born in Israel, and as my husband and I were planning to move back to America because of an illness in my family, I remember I said to a friend of mine, "Who am I if I'm not Laura who loves Israel?" And she said, "You're still Laura who loves Israel." And of course she was right. As Director of Israel Guidance here at SIR, it's my goal and dream to be able to make it possible for any student who wants to spend a year in Israel after graduation.
So Israel has been important to our personal lives and also to our professional lives, as we've taught about Israel for as long as we've been teaching Jewish history. But in the last 5 years, it's become even more central to our professional lives and our thinking about teaching. Because as studies have shown that the relationship between American diaspora Jewry and Israel has begun to fray, people have looked to Israel education as a way to shore up that relationship. And Laura and I take that responsibility quite seriously, and we understand it to mean that we're not just supposed to teach about Israel, but we're actually supposed to foster connection and love between our students and the land. That's quite a high bar, and the question is, how do we do that?
Once upon a time,
like when we were kids,
Israel education was a simpler affair. We learned about Israel as the culmination of the Zionist dream, of the little country that could. It was a much, much simpler time. Our students today have unparalleled access to information and alternate perspectives. They also have really complicated 21st century identities. So the black and white Israel education that we had when we were kids is not going to work for them.
So the buzzword today is nuance. And all the articles and podcasts and conferences that you go to on Israel education talk about teaching Israel with nuance as the gold standard.
So over the past 5 years, as we've tried to create an Israel curriculum with nuance, we've struggled. And for a long time, we couldn't figure out why we were struggling so much. And then we realized that the reason we were struggling is because of that word, nuance. We didn't know what it meant. And we didn't think that any of those articles or teacher training sessions or conferences knew what it meant either. So we invite you to be a fly on the wall as we have a planning meeting to talk about our curriculum with nuance.
Hey, Laura.
Hey.
Glad we could fit a meeting in with our busy schedules.
Yeah.
I want to talk about how we're going to teach about 1947 and 48 in our class next week. I know it's a biggie. I brought some special dark chocolate. I know it's your favorite. But let's really look at our curriculum and see if what we have planned is really going to meet our goals of teaching with nuance.
Okay, I think that the chocolate's not going to be enough. I'm also going to need some coffee.
Sorry, I didn't bring that.
But to be honest, I actually think that we're doing a good job. I mean, you know, we're going to teach about the excellent military victory. Impressive military victory. But at the same time, we're also going to talk about the fact that the Israeli army did expel people from their homes and killed innocent civilians. And I think we can actually have a really interesting conversation about Jewish power and what that means. So I actually think we are teaching with nuance. So let's go. Then we're done.
Don't pack up yet. Okay, good. I do think it's a step in the right direction. It certainly is different from the Israel education we got, and this warts and all telling of the story that acknowledges some difficult aspects of Israel's past is important. But I don't know, are we going far enough to meeting our goals? We have to have that conversation.
We have the goals conversation a lot.
What are our goals in teaching about Israel to our students?
So you know what I'm going to say. I worry so much about what our students are going to face when they get onto college campuses. I mean, I have 2 college students myself, and my daughter spent so many hours over the past month fighting against a BDS resolution on her campus. So I just think that if we don't tell them and teach them what they should be responding when they get to campus, that maybe we haven't done our job.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about advocacy, which is an issue I think about a lot. And I'm guessing that you think about that too, and you think about your children going to college campuses. But I'm going to push back, because you are a historian.
I know.
And you know that advocacy and history are very different. Advocacy tends to simplify issues in order to make a point or win an argument, whereas the study of history is meant to be an objective investigation of the past, to really understand what happened. And so I guess I just wonder whether we're going far enough in our approach. Oh, but I have a thought. History, by definition, is complicated and messy, and our students are complicated and messy, and I actually think our goal in teaching about Israel is to help them develop a Jewish identity, and in this case, one that has Israel at its center.
I think you're on the right track, because I'm thinking, of course, of the infamous letter that we got from the SAR grad who told us that we lied to her at SAR, and she went off to campus and not only felt alienated from us, but also felt alienated from Israel. So it occurs to me that actually, if we're going to do the best job of educating our kids for college campuses, that what we really need to be doing is having those uncomfortable conversations about Israel here in our Zionist school with their Zionist teachers, so that they can attain that mature love for Israel before they go off to campus.
Yes, I think that's great, and that's definitely one of our goals. But I'm going to push us even more, because when I think about our goals for teaching history more broadly at SAR, one of our important goals is critical thinking, and we do that by exposing our students to multiple perspectives. We always bring in primary sources that enable our students to see an event from different angles and how different people who experienced them might have thought about it. And so are we doing that with our Israel curriculum, and should we be going there?
I think you're right. I mean, our students certainly hear the Zionist perspective. They've heard it their whole lives, but I don't know that they've ever heard a Palestinian perspective. And if we're going that direction, I think that we would have to teach, in 1948, we'd have to teach about Nakba, the fact that the Palestinians see the creation of Israel as a catastrophe, and that they carry that perspective with them till today.
Yeah. But now, I know I was pushing, but now I feel like, brakes. Is that going too far? I mean, do we delegitimize Israel when we do that? I worry about that. I'm guessing you might worry about that as well. And I can hear you saying, oh, in American history, we teach about the Trail of Tears, so we can understand how Native Americans experienced westward expansion. But that seems like a long time ago. It doesn't have that many current implications, whereas teaching about Nakba feels much more relevant and a little scarier.
Yeah, I hear you, but I don't think you should second guess yourself, because I'm thinking about the 2016 election for a second.
Okay.
Remember, the morning after, we all woke up and said, oh my God, we kind of don't know vast swaths of this country. We don't know their perspectives. And in the years since, there have been all these books published about the Appalachian coal miner, for example. And once we heard his perspective, we realized that if we don't understand him, we can't get past this very divisive, angry moment our country's in now.
Yeah, that's a really good, it's an illuminating example, because my initial reaction is, I don't think we should support coal. It's not good for the environment. We should be putting our resources behind renewable, cleaner energy. But when I take a moment to step into his perspective, I appreciate that it's not just his livelihood, which in its own is important, but it's really about a way of life. It's how he lives, his grandfather, great-grandfather. It's the lifestyle and the values that he imagines passing on to his children. And it's only when I really can understand that we can begin to have a conversation and perhaps heal and perhaps move our country forward in a more united way.
Exactly. Adina, I think we might have just made a case for teaching about Nakba.
I think so, although I still have a little pit in my stomach. I'm a little worried about it.
Me too. I'm feeling uncomfortable, but maybe we need to sit on it a little bit. There's the bell. Thank God. We can sit on it and think about it tomorrow.
Okay, great. So this is where we landed. We teach history with nuance for two reasons. We have two goals. The first is to foster identity and love for Israel. And in order to do that successfully in the 21st century, it needs to be based on a complex story, which means we have to include some uncomfortable truths about Israel's past.
But identity is not enough. The second reason we teach with nuance is to teach empathy. We're history educators, and we believe deeply in the power of the study of history to humanize us and to teach us empathy. History exposes us to the unfamiliar. It highlights our own particularism. It teaches us arivut, or a sense of responsibility for the other, and it reminds us how interconnected we are with all other human beings. To achieve our goals as history educators, we need to introduce other narratives.
I believe in that wholeheartedly, but I will admit that it makes me a little uncomfortable. It smacks of a kind of universalism that I worry might overshadow my particularist Jewish and Zionist identity. Can I hold that identity and the humanity of the Palestinians at the same time? Shouldn't my Zionism come first? The answer to that question is yes. My Judaism and Zionism does come first. Both are fundamental to who I am. The course that I teach does tell a proud and passionate Zionist history. When I teach my students about the UN vote in 1947, I want them to get chills. And I want them to have tears in their eyes, like we do when they hear the recording of the paratroopers in 1967 say, Har Habayit Bi'adenu. These stories are our history. They're our Jewish memory, and they are central parts of our present as well. But prioritizing our Zionist identity doesn't mean that we can't have compassion for the other.
And more than just compassion, this is about our future. Understanding the past dictates how you see the present and allows you to have imagination about what could be in the future. The Palestinians carry their past with them. When they think about the UN partition plan in 1947, they think about a sense of injustice, that they were 2/3 of the population and got less than 50% of the land, and that people who had just arrived from Europe got more than 50% of the land. And when they look down at the keys to the house their great-grandfather built in Yafo, and that they can never return to, they feel uprooted and displaced. We don't have to agree with their politics to understand their sense of loss. Ignoring or dismissing their narrative is othering. And othering is not useful. It's detrimental. They're not going away. And failing to understand their narrative does not allow us to imagine a workable future for these two people who both claim the same land.
And we carry our past with us as well. We know that while many Jews did come from Europe, our connection to the land is thousands of years old and deep. In fact, there have always been Jews in Eretz Yisrael. Understanding why a people emerging from the Holocaust who had no country that would open its doors to those fleeing from Hitler is crucial to our understanding of Israel's obsession with security. And it helps us understand why Israel would pass the law of return in the early 1950s, which would allow Israel to be a safe haven for any Jew who wanted it from around the world. Even if the Palestinians don't agree about our connection to the land and don't agree that Israel's security is threatened, they must understand our narrative in order for us to move forward.
This past semester, I was preparing my students for a talk by Syed Kashua, an Israeli Arab author. And one of my students raised his hand and he said, "Is he on our team?" And I didn't know what to say in that moment, but now as I speak to you, I realize that if we think about ourselves as two teams with only one victor, we're doomed. Syed Kashua has a different history. He has a different perspective, and he probably has a different vision of what the future should look like. But understanding him is actually critical to the future of Zionism and of Israel.
I hope you can tell how committed we are to Israel and how committed we are to getting this right and teaching our students with nuance, and that it has to mean more than a warts and all story of Israel that stays firmly within the Israeli perspective. My hope is that when my students take my class, they can come to me at the end and say, "Ms. Shoulson, I realize that I can be a passionate Zionist and still understand where the Palestinians are coming from. I can hold my identity and their identity, even when they might contradict. In fact, I realize that I have to hold them both." Thank you.
Thank you.